Hi students, welcome to your third week of online classes. This week we're going to finish up with our unit on types of sentences. We've looked at phrases, clauses, dependent, independent clauses, simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. For our last session on that unit, we're going to look at compound complex sentences. First of all, let's do a review on the three types of sentences that we have looked at so far. The first type of sentence we've looked at is simple sentence. A simple sentence, as we mentioned, consists of one idea. It's made up of one independent clause. Here's an example. I passed the exam. Has a subject, has a verb, has a complete thought. It's one simple sentence. Compound sentences, on the other hand, have two independent clauses. That means that they have two sentences that can stand alone and are being put together by what we call a coordinating conjunction along with a comma. Sometimes these compound sentences have two independent clauses being put together also by a semicolon. The third type of sentence we looked at were complex sentences. Complex sentences have one independent clause and one dependent clause. What does this mean? This means that the complex sentence has one sentence that can stand alone. It's a complete thought. And one or more dependent clauses, the ones that cannot stand alone. Here are a few examples. Even though I passed the exam, I wasn't happy with the grade. Here, as you can see, the independent clause is I wasn't happy with the grade. That can stand alone, right? And the dependent clause in this case is even though I passed the exam. Because the dependent clause is at the beginning, we said that the dependent clause must follow the dependent clause is a comma. What about when the dependent clause is at the back? Well, that's example number 2 here. It says, I wasn't happy with the grade. See, there's no comma there, even though I passed the exam. And those are the three types of sentences that we've looked at so far. Let's take a look at the one for today, compound complex. Yes, there is such a thing as a compound complex sentence. Here's the definition. It says, a compound complex sentences have two or more independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. That means that this type of sentence holds two independent clauses, meaning a compound, right? A compound sentence. And what makes it the complex part is the fact that it has one that cannot stand alone. That means it's a combination. It's putting together both compound sentences and complex sentences. You put them together and you've created yourself a compound complex sentence. The format of the sentence, therefore, would look something like this. It would have one compound. For example, here it says, my boyfriend and I went to San Juan and we danced all night. Here you can see that this is the compound part of the sentence. And the complex part is the fact that it has a subordinating conjunction with a subordinating clause, right? A statement that cannot stand alone, a clause that cannot stand alone, a dependent clause. So the sentence would read something like, since we wanted to have fun, my boyfriend and I went to San Juan and we danced all night. Here you can see that the coordinating conjunction and is joining the compound part, and because it's a compound part, it needs a comma, right? Here, and the subordinating conjunction starting is since, and this part here is the complex part of the sentence. Because it's starting the sentence, it needs a comma as well right here. This is how a compound complex sentence looks like. Here are the examples. My mother is a superwoman and she is very hardworking because she wants to be a role model to her children. That's example number 1. Let's see why this is a compound complex sentence. If it's a compound complex sentence, it must have a compound sentence and a dependent clause, one that cannot stand alone. So the compound part of this sentence reads, my mother is a superwoman and she is very hardworking. If you notice, that statement has two independent clauses put together by a comma and a conjunction. That's the compound part of the sentence. The complex part is when you add the dependent clause. In this case, the dependent clause is because she wants to be a role model to her children. Together, when you put them together, you've created yourself a beautiful compound complex sentence. Example number 2 reads, because Mike had a lot of work, my sister and I left the house, so it would be quiet. Where's the compound part of the sentence? The compound part of the sentence is right there where it says, my sister and I left the house, so it would be quiet. That's compound because it has two independent clauses being put together by a comma and a conjunction. The complex part is added when you put a dependent clause. This time the dependent clause is at the beginning. Because Mike had a lot of work, comma, that is the dependent clause, right? So together, when you put that dependent clause with a compound sentence, you've just created yourself a compound complex sentence. Here's the last example. It reads, if I get an A+, my mother will reward me and my father will be very proud when he sees my grade. Remember that we said there must be a compound sentence in a compound complex sentence. The compound part of this sentence reads, my mother will reward me and my father will be very proud. That's a compound sentence. However, because you've added the complex part, now it has become a compound complex sentence. If I get an A+ is a dependent clause, and when he sees my grade is also a dependent clause, making this together with a compound complex sentence. So I provided the last example so you can see that the compound complex sentence doesn't always have just one dependent clause. It could have one or more. So to reiterate, a compound complex sentence is a sentence that has a compound sentence, a pair, right, that are joined together, independent clauses, and one or more dependent clauses, just like number 3, right? So punctuation, let's look at punctuation because it's very important as well. Look at example number 1. It has a punctuation between woman and. Why? Because we said that it needs a comma and a coordinating conjunction to join the compound sentences. Does it need a comma between hardworking and because? No, because the dependent clause is at the back. Unlike number 2, where the dependent clause is at the beginning, we said it needs a comma, right? So that's why there's a comma right between work and my sister. Last example, if you notice, there is a dependent clause that starts the sentence. And because it starts a sentence, it does need a comma. But the other dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, so that does not need a comma, as we mentioned, right? So that is all for punctuations and examples for compound complex sentences. Why then do we want to use compound complex sentences? They sound a bit complicated, right? However, if you are able to successfully write compound complex sentence, your writing will elevate. It will be a lot more sophisticated. Also, compound complex sentences are used to describe ideas, describe long chains of events. Here's the quick review for those who need that little comparison and contrast. Independent clauses, as we said, are simple sentences that have one independent clause. Compound sentences have two independent clauses. Complex sentences have one independent clause and one dependent clause, one that cannot stand alone. And the last, compound complex, has two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So if you notice in this little chart that I provided here, I gave you an example of how it would look if sentences were human beings, right? So in the first one, independent clause, there's an independent woman, right? This one is represented by one independent person, a simple sentence, one independent. Compound sentence. Compound sentence, we said, are two independent clauses. They're represented here in this image by two independent people, right? Both of them can stand alone. Complex sentence. Complex sentence is like having a baby and an adult, right? The adult represents the independent clause and the baby represents the dependent clause. And lastly, if you want to look at a compound complex sentence, you'd have two independent clauses, right? In this case, these are being represented by two adults, and a baby represents the dependent clause. Of course, compound complex sentences could have other babies, right? Because you could have as many dependent clause as you can add to the sentence. So I thought this was a cute, lovely representation of our types of sentence, and I hope it was very helpful for you. And that's it. That is our unit on writing sentences. We looked at phrases, clauses, independent, dependent clauses, coordinating conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions, compound sentences, complex sentences, and lastly, but not least, our compound complex sentence. Have a blessed week. I hope that this was very helpful and that you understood our videos. If not, there will be other activities posted that hopefully will clarify this for you. Bye guys, have a blessed day.